Welcome to the weekly Livestock Market Report on Brownfield. I'm your host, Meghan Grebner, with us as always to talk all things markets. University of Missouri, Scott Brown. Good afternoon, Scott.
Good afternoon, Megan.
Our program is brought to you by the Feedstuff Finder from the University of Missouri. Feedstuff Finder was developed by the University of Missouri Extension with funds provided from the North Central Extension Risk Management Education and the USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture. You can find a link to it on our website, but also in the newsletter, which you will receive in your email box on Saturday morning. All right, so we're going to talk markets this week. Scott, as we take a look at what happened, really kind of a pullback, especially on the cattle side of things.
Yeah, that's correct. We've kind of changed our tune from where we were a few weeks ago in terms of hogs being the one that was always moving lower and cattle moving up. But when we look at what we got this week, live fed cattle were down $1 this week. We saw those feeder cattle auctions anywhere from 2 to 6 lower generally this week. On the future side, the June live cattle futures contract was down $8.45, and the May feeder contract was down $10.30. That puts feeder cattle futures down about $15.50 over the last couple of weeks. Choice box beef also moved lower this week, down $8 on the week. We really lost almost across the board in all those components. On the hog side, a better week. Cash barrels and gilts $1.75 higher this week, and we saw the June lean hog futures contract close up $6.50. We also saw gains in the pork cutout value. It's $2.25 higher this week. That actually puts it $19.25 higher than it was a year ago at this time, and makes that annual change larger than what's boxed beef, that's only up $12.65.
When we look at what's happening, obviously we've been going up consistently on the cattle side of things in terms of prices. There's been some interesting news. I think we like not to focus too heavily on the high pass situation, but as that conversation has happened, we've seen some pullback in the markets. Is it more of a concern, or is it kind of, again, a little bit of both because we've been so high and we are just kind of correcting and pulling back a little bit?
Well, so I think when we realize where we've been in terms of cattle prices at record levels, it doesn't take much news to make those markets move lower. And so I think just where we're at has had a lot to do with it. And so you take that kind of news of high path AI and just the potential maybe for worries about what happens on the consumer side, and it moves those prices down, as we saw this week with especially futures that tumbled as a result of that. I'm not convinced that we don't come back and still see higher prices as we get further in here to 2024. But these kinds of downward moves, it's probably not the last time we're going to see this. And I'm sure, as much as you and I have talked about risk management, everyone had all their downside risk covered and avoided any of the downside from this week.
I was going to say, this is probably a good reminder, and we don't have to continue to beat that into everybody, but risk management matters right now.
And it's all these things that, all right, so who would have thought high path AI in dairy cows was going to start and unfold here over the last several days? It's those kinds of events that we're really trying to protect the downside movement of prices against. And we can argue or disagree with how much prices have moved, but when we're at these kinds of record levels, it doesn't take markets long to adjust to any kind of news.
All right, so we're going to talk weekly slaughter as we take a look at cattle and hog slaughter for this week. Obviously, keep in mind a little bit slower of a week last week going into the holiday weekend. How are things running?
Yeah, so if you look at cattle slaughter this week, USDA tells us for the week ending April 6th, a run of 609,000 head of cattle this week. That is 23,000 higher than last week and 4,000 higher than where we ran a year ago. For me, the interesting one, hog slaughter this week, a run of 2.421 million head of hogs. That is higher than last week, up only 17,000 head though. We seem to be getting awful current in terms of hog slaughter and hog marketings these days. When you look at that relative to last year, up 51,000 head.
Let's talk year over year comparison for cattle and hogs.
Yeah, so year to date on the cattle slaughter side, we're down 5.4%, while on hog slaughter, we're up 0.6%.
All right, two reports out this week. Monthly trade data, we're going to start there. Let's talk about beef exports for February of 2024.
Yeah, so when we look at what we got out of the report this week, 244.1 million pounds of beef exports out of the United States. That is down 2.6% relative to what we did a year ago. Interestingly, Japan and South Korea seem to be the two big areas where we were lower this month's report. China, Hong Kong, Taiwan was actually up marginally. Mexico was also higher. So what's been traditionally maybe stronger markets for us both showed declines for February.
On the other side of things, let's talk a little bit about pork exports.
Yeah, so higher pork exports out of the United States for February. 593.4 million pounds of pork left in February. That's 17.7% higher than where we were a year ago. Mexico, South Korea was higher as well. China down, but all those other markets, those we aren't mentioning, up 38.4 million pounds again this month. Just reminds me to say we're getting a lot of strength in some other markets that I think are important to what the overall pork export number looks like.
I feel like it doesn't say enough for us to talk about how strong of exports are to Mexico and just how that relationship has continued to grow.
Yeah, so I guess from my standpoint, at times worried about whether you could maintain that growth longer term. It's been really good growth, and thus far the answer has been yes. When you look at Mexico again, up another almost 40 million pounds for February, 22% higher than where they were February of a year ago. That's pretty impressive that we continue that march higher. And when you look at year to date, all right, so Mexico's been 454 million pounds out of a total 1.2 billion. So they are the largest market for us.
How concerned are we long term about the import export balance on the beef side of things?
Well, we're certainly here in the short run seeing what happens when you have record prices. Beef imports totaled 351 million pounds in February. That was almost 24% higher than it was a year ago. We're 32% higher for the first two months of this year. It's one way. So when you look at 2024 beef imports for the first 2 months, 206 million pounds above year ago, it's one way to help offset a portion of what's shorter beef production. And so I think that will continue as we go through 2024. And again, I think from a value standpoint, beef exports has been okay. But again, there's a lot of interest in beef coming into the United States from some other countries when they see these kind of record prices.
I hear a lot, why don't we just use our own beef here? Why are we importing beef? And I know you and I have talked about this before, but I think it's worth reminding because this is going to be a conversation and a number that's probably going to stand out for some time right now. When we look at this balance, of trade and what we're doing, are we just, when we think about the value that that trade relationship brings, does it make more sense, or why does it make more sense for us to bring in some of that lean beef or some of that other beef as an import product?
Yeah, so when we think about what we're doing in terms of imports, we are by and large bringing in lean beef from countries like Australia, New Zealand. That's a majority of what's coming in. The nice thing about that lean beef coming in is we can mix it with fat that we might have left over here from fed cattle to create more value out of those fat trimmings than otherwise would be the case. So we do get some benefits. I know some won't buy that as you and I talk about this today, and I'll add to that. So we want freer trade in agricultural products. We want to break down tariff barriers, especially from a livestock perspective, because we'll win out of that strategy by being able to export more products. So this is all about how do we play fairly as well. And if all of a sudden we go, well, we don't want imports and because we're hurting our own prices, that can come back to haunt us in some of these other markets we're trying to get in over time as well. And again, I know some listening won't agree with this discussion whatsoever, but I will keep saying I think U.S. agriculture wins if we can find ways to reduce barriers to trade.
I think another win for livestock producers, beef, pork producers, has got to be this month's jobs report. Another strong jobs report, another drop in unemployment, and I would have to think that that bodes well long term or in the short term for demand.
Yeah, so I think so, Megan. So 303,000 jobs were added in March. That's a much stronger than anybody thought pre-report. 213,000 was pre-report estimate out there, so exceeded by nearly 100,000. Unemployment rate did fall to 3.8%. So, boy, that jobs market stays fairly warm, especially given some news of some places where we're seeing cuts in workforce. But it really doesn't show up when you look at the jobs report. We are seeing construction being a part of that, healthcare being part of the growth in terms of what we got out of the report this week. But that's more jobs, stronger demand for food. And, I continue to kind of go down this road that we're seeing more and more food expenditures away from home, people going out to eat. Jobs equates to the opportunity to go out and eat more often, I think. And so I think that's the strong demand side of that market that maybe continues to allow us to have record or growing beef prices as we look in the months ahead.
Scott, that'll do it for us this week. As we look ahead to next week, we'll talk retail prices, some supply and demand, and consumer sentiment. What are you looking for out of those reports next week?
I think on the retail prices side, this will be a focus on beef and where beef retail prices really are. How high are they going as we look at that data? On the consumer sentiment side, I'm curious to watch how consumers are reacting to all of the economic news that we have today, whether or not they continue to show some strength. I think those are a couple of the big pieces to talk through next week.
Scott, we will talk to you next Friday.
Sounds good, Megan.
So every weekly livestock market update delivered to your email box every Saturday morning. Go to brownfieldagnews.com. You can also submit questions and comments. And for market updates from the one and only John Perkins, make sure to check out the Market Minute both morning and afternoon. Have a great weekend, folks. I'm Meghan Grebner for Brownfield.